Hey guys, welcome back to this tutorial. I'm so excited about this tutorial because it's like my best topic in Python and we're getting deeper and deeper. I hope all my previous tutorials were very comprehensive and you understand them. Please, if you have any questions, please drop them in the comment section. I'll be sure to attend to them. So today we are going to be looking at custom-made functions. We've been using Python's inbuilt functions all this while. We've used the print function, we've used the range function, we've used lots of functions when we looked at the sequence data types and variables and other things. So those functions were inbuilt Python functions. They were codes that has been written already by Python for us to use. So here we are going to make our own functions that will be able to perform any task we want. So simply, for refreshers, functions are block of codes that performs a particular task. So a function accepts argument, and it will return something to you. So simply, when you want to create functions in Python, there are rules you must follow. To create a function in Python, you use the def keyword. So this def means that you're telling Python that, hey, I want to create a function. Then you write the name of your function after it. So it can be anything. It can be my function. Then you put a parenthesis. You see this is highlighted yellow. So after the parenthesis, you put a colon to indicate that this is the end of this line. Then there has to be an indent. Remember indentation when we talked about loops in Python. So in this indent, everything you want your function to do, you write the codes here. So let's do something as print. This is my first function. So I've defined a function, my func, and I want it to do this. That is to print. This is my first function. Now, how do I access this function? Remember when we want to use the print statement, we use print and then we put whatever we want to print in the parentheses. The same way when we wanted to use range function, we use the range and we put parentheses. So whenever you want to call a function, you write the name of the function. In this case, we've created a function named myfunc, and then you put the parentheses. That is the way to call a function. So let's execute this and see. You see, we have this is my first function. Where is the result? So you see, we have this is my first function. So we've called our function, we've created our first function, and we've called it, and it has returned what we want. But then this is just a very simple function to get you started. And this function, it's not accepting any arguments. So you see, we just initialized it with just this parentheses and there's no argument in it. So normally when you create functions, advanced functions in Python, they would take arguments. So let's create another function, a simple calculator that would add two numbers together. Let's def sum, or let's name it add. Then in this parentheses, we want to put in the arguments, that is a and b. Then we put the colon, and then what do we want to do? We want it to return a plus b. Now we've written a function add, and it's taking a and b arguments, and it's going to return a plus b. So a function must return something. If you do not include this return statement in your function, it will return none. No matter what you write in your function, it will return none. So let me call this function. Remember, we call the function by writing the name of the function and the parentheses. Then, since we've initialized this function with two arguments, if you call it simply like this, it will give you an error. Let's try this. Add. You see? Add missing two required positional arguments A and B. So it needs us to pass in the required arguments. So let's say add 8 and 5 and 6. Okay. What happened? Add. Okay, let's print this to see it because it's not the last statement on our. Let's see. Why is this taking too long? Okay, you see we have 14. We have 14. So you see our function works pretty well. Let me add, let's say 50 or 5,000 and 745. Okay, we have this. So our function seems to be working pretty fine. So that's just a simple function. You can do numerous things with functions. You can build a calculator with a function. You can build, there are lots of things that you can build. You can tell your computer to do anything with a function, and this is just the simple way to create it. These are the arguments you pass in, and then this is what you instructed it to return, and that is what it's going to return. So that is just that about creating functions. Now let's look at scope of variables. Scope of variables are simply the locations. So a scope of variable is a location where you can see or access a variable. So in Python we have two type of variables. We have the local variable and the global variable. Let's say I do something like this: x is equal to 20, and then I create a function def, let's say any func, and then I initialize this and I say x is equal to 10. Print x. Print x. Now if I print x, remember this print x here is not the same as this print x here. This print x is in this indent block, meaning that it belongs to this function, and this print x means that you are outside of the function, you are in the global scope. So if I execute this, I get 20 because the x in the function is not visible to outside of the function. So this x here is a local variable, while this x here is a global variable. So if I say print, so this, what you can call this print x, this function, this x here, you can call a global variable in a function, but you cannot call a local variable in a global environment. Let me explain what I mean. So we've defined x as here, and I defined the function to print x. Now let me call this function any func. Let me print it so that we see the output. So you see we get 20. So it is accessible. So we are getting, you can see we get this none. None is because you did not include a return statement. And remember I told you, if you do not include a return statement in your Python, in your function, it will return none. So that is why you are seeing this none. So we get 20, which is a global variable. So you can access a global variable in a function. Now let's say I defined a new variable named y. Now y is, let's say, 10, and this is outside of the function. Let me now say print y, and let's see what we'll have. So you see it's saying j. Why do we have y as j? I don't know why we have y as j, but that is not, it's not giving us 10. So there seems to be a default value for y. So we're not getting y as 10 because y, this value of y is not accessible to outside of the environment. So this variable y is in the local scope and it can only be accessible within the function only. But x here is a global variable and can be accessible anywhere within the global scope or within any function. So I hope you understand what the scope of variables mean. So that's just that about scope of variables. Now let's look at multiple arguments. So you can create a function, let's say def custom list, and you want this custom list function to accept as many numbers as the user gives it, and you want it to return the minimum value using the min function of, let's say you have an argument of a and you want it to return the minimum of a. Now how do you tell Python that this is a multiple argument? Because if you leave it like this, a is just recognized as a single argument. But to tell Python that this is a multiple argument, you add the star. So that is to tell Python that this is a multiple argument. Now if we initialize this now and you say custom list and you pass in, let's say 4 5 2 3 7 6, let's see what would get printed out. Let me remove this. Let's see this. So you see we get 2 printed out because we asked it to return the minimum of the a. So but if we do not include that, if we do not include this star, we are telling Python that this is just a single argument. So you would see the error it will give us. So you see custom list takes 1 positional argument but 5 were given. So you need to tell Python that this is a multiple argument. You want to pass multiple arguments and you don't know how many. It can be as many as possible. So you simply just add a star here and you'll be just fine. So usually we use this we represent this argument with args. It can be anything though, but the usual custom is to just put args here. Args. So that is key argument. It means argument. So that is just that about that. So okay, it's supposed to be args. So you see we still have 2 here. So that is that about having multiple arguments. Now we also have keyword arguments. What do I mean by keyword arguments? Let's say I want to create a function that can greet people, that initialize it, and I say name is equal to, I give a default keyword argument that is name, programmer, and age is 18, and language is is Python. And then in this function I'm saying print I'll use the f string for my placeholder, hello, then it should greet the programmer, hello programmer, you are 8 years old and studying language. Now, I've given the default parameters to be programmer 18 language, such that when you initialize this, it will not give you an error. You see, you have hello programmer, you are 18 and studying Python. So, but then I can put my own as, let's say, I can write name is Mariam, age is 30. So if I use this, you see I get hello Mariam, you are 30 and studying Python. So whichever one I feel, it will use the value I impute as the values, and whichever one I do, anyone I do not impute, it will use the default value. But let's say if I remove these values now, these default values, and I call this function with just these two values, can you guess what will happen? You see, greet missing one required positional argument language. So to avoid such errors, you can just give default value in case the user forgets to impute one of the parameters. So you set default values, as we've seen in our range function that it has default values. So the range function, when we used it earlier, if we say, just for you to understand this concept more better, if we say print a list of range of 10, you see a range actually takes 3 arguments. I've said it earlier in the previous tutorials. You have the start number, the stop, and the step. But in Python, the default value has been written, the start has been written to be 0, the stop would be whatever you enter, then the step would be whatever step you enter, but the step value has a default of 1. So if I print this out now, I would get, you see, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But if they didn't give it a default value, it would have returned an error that I must include those values. So that's one of the benefits of including default values in your functions. It makes it easier for your users to be able to use your functions. So then I said earlier that your function must return something, so it's good to put it in practice to always include return statements in your functions. So you can also create a blank function. If you need to create a function and you don't want it to do anything yet, you can just create it, my func, and then in it you just write pass. So this will not do anything, it's just like an empty function. We've seen this pass statement in the for loops, so it will do the same thing here as well. Now we have what we call recursion. Recursion means when a function calls itself. Like we create a function, and then in the function, normally when we create a function, we call it outside of the scope. We call it in the global scope. But recursion is when a function calls itself. So an example of that is a function I've already created. So I'm just pasting it here so I don't waste your time. So I created a function called factorial, and it takes an argument a. So in this function, I'm saying if a is equals to 1, result is 1, else result is a times factorial of a minus 1. You see, this factorial is a function, is this particular function. So I'm calling the function in itself. So that is recursion. So let's look at what this is going to produce. Let's say factorial of 6. And let's see, you see we have 720. So I don't know if you understand what is happening back end here. So the first time, so when the function goes in, if a is equal to 1, since we entered 6, a is not equals to 1, so it will not go inside this if block, so it will go inside the else statement. So since our a is greater than 1, our result will now be a. So in this case, a will be 6. In this first case, let me make it better. In this first case, a will be 6 times factorial of 6 minus 1. Now this factorial of 6 minus 1, that will be 5. So the function will call itself again factorial of 5. So it will call itself, if a is equal to 1, result is 1. So a is not equal to 1 also, result is what? So the result of this function that called itself, so this will now be, this will be 6. Then the result of this will now be what? A times, so this a here will be what? 5 times factorial of 5 minus 1, that is 4. So the function will call itself again. It goes back in. If a is equal to 1, the result is 1. So a is not equal to 1, it will go back here. So the result will be what? A times factorial a minus 1. So it will return what here? You have your 6, 5, and this will now be, the value for this will be this result here. So that will be what? A, and the a here is what? 4 times what? Factorial of what? 4 minus 1 will be 3. So it will go and do the same over and over again. Result will be what? 6 times 5 times 4 times 3, then times factorial of 3 minus 1, that is 2. And it goes back again, and the result will be what? 6 times 5 times 4 times 3 times 2. So this time around, you have factorial to be, then you still have 2. So it's going back, and you have factorial of 2 minus 1, that is 1. And it says when a is 1, result is 1. So everything here will now be 6 times 5 times 4 times 3 times 2, times 2 times 1. So this is the formula. If you are familiar with mathematics, you will see that this is the formula to calculate the factorial of any given number. So that is just what we've done with this function by using the recursion. So the recursion is just when a function calls itself, as we have seen in this example. So sometimes you might need to use recursions, and most of the time recursions are not really good because you don't get to understand. Sometimes to understand the complexity behind the logic, it's usually a bit difficult. So you don't have to use it. You just need to get the concept in case you need it once in a while. So that is that about creating functions. I would urge you to practice functions and think of different types of things that you can do. You can create a simple interest calculator. You can combine all the knowledge you've gained so far from these tutorials, the loops, the sequence data types, the functions, the conditional statements. Use all of this and come up with something very nice, and you can share them with me in the comment section. I would go through your codes and I'll definitely give you a feedback. Do not forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel, and thanks.